everyone talks about God, everyone talks about God expressing himself or itself through us, the universe, and that we're all one. And sometimes I've noticed the people that I work with come up to me and say, those feel like empty words. I don't understand. I feel alone in this world. And I feel that I don't have the support of all that is. So people that ask me to explain to them what I think God is and what our role is in this universe and how we relate to each other, when people ask me that, I have this great analogy that I love, and apparently my publishers loved it too because they made it the cover of my book that I'll talk about later. Where is it? Oh, it's a tree. It's a tree analogy, and that was supposed to be in focus. So the tree analogy goes like this, and I love this because it popped in my head one time, and I just felt like it was the best explanation that I had of how it all works. So I want you to think of a beautiful, majestic oak tree, a giant tree with beautiful leaves. And then I want you to think about its roots that are under the ground. And I want you to think about those roots as what we consider to be God. And God is the God in its purest form before it even decides to be physical is the root of this tree. And as God decides to become and create a physical world, I want you to think about that trunk, that thick trunk, being God focusing into creating our physical world. Then I want you to think about the branches as they start to differentiate from the trunk and become their own entities and going different directions as the archangels and the angels that are starting to have their own perspective. And as the branches get smaller, I want you to think of those smaller branches as our soul families and our guardian angels and guides in our lives. And as the branches get to their smallest form, I want you to think of those as our souls. And then I want you to think about the leaves that are temporary in nature and come for a season, have their cycle, and leave. And I want you to think about those leaves as us, as human beings on this earth or wherever dimension that physical life exists. And I want you to think of us as leaves on a tree with our very unique perspective, because each leaf on that tree has its own unique location and its own unique perspective. Now, the leaf knows that its journey is temporary because come spring, it sprouts out, fall, it starts to dry out, and by winter, it's gone. But I want to ask you a question. Is the root the tree? Well, it's definitely part of the tree. Yes, the root is the tree. Is the leaf the tree? And of course, the answer is yes. Are the branches the tree? And the answer is yes to that. And are all the different perspectives of each branch and each leaf just as important as the other? I know you already answered in your own mind that it is a yes, but it's hard for us leaves to understand our importance in this world when we see ourselves only as leaves. And as long as we see ourselves as something separate from the rest of the tree, we will always come up short. We'll always be just a leaf, when in fact, we are the physical expression of that root, that God force. And as long as we start to compare ourselves with the other leaves, we'll always come up short. But what happens is that one of the leaves decides that their way and their perspective is the right way and starts telling all the other leaves that you have to grow at this angle, you have to do this and that. And unfortunately, the leaves have social media now, so they can literally communicate with the other leaves, and all the other leaves decide to be just like that one leaf. And when they do that, they stop being themselves and lose their authenticity. And I thought this was a really good reason to tie this into this week's theme or this month's theme, because every leaf has its own role. That the leaves give life to the tree because they take energy from the sun. And they're just as important as the root in giving nourishment to the tree. But the leaves can only do that if they decide that their own existence is unique and special and not compare themselves to the location and the stage of development of other leaves. And that's what we tend to do. We tend to use the outer compass of the outside world as our indicator of how well we're doing in life. When what we should be doing, and I don't want to say should because people should do whatever they feel like doing, but what we can be doing is use our inner perspective, our inner compass, which means instead of trying to guide ourselves through this existence, through this life, using other leaves' opinions and words and perspectives, we can tap in, go within, and tap into the branch and the root and the trunk and all the different variations of existence. And when you tap in, you go within, you not only have access to the perspectives of every other leaf from an inner perspective, from a God perspective, you have access to the infinite wisdom that is the God force that's within you. And I know we've heard we've got to tap into our inner God force, inner self. And I really felt like this was a really good analogy to show that what we have access to, but what we only have access to if we quiet the noise that's out there. The noise that's out there is very limited in nature. But if we accept the idea and entertain the idea that we have infinite intelligence within us, but only if we quiet our minds, only if we give airtime to the inner voice that's dying to be heard. Only then can we access the infinite wisdom that's within us. But the problem is, here's the problem. No intuition, no inner voice is ever going to be louder than the five senses of the outer noise and the outer noise. The outer noise is always going to be louder because we are designed to come and live on this planet. We are in survival mode because we need to survive. We need to make sure we see what we see, we hear what we hear, we feel what we feel to make sure we stay alive. So the inner voice has always been something that's within us, but will always be quiet, quieter than our other senses. So once we have our footing on the ground and make sure that we are fed and we are housed, then we can take time to quiet our minds, take a moment as you're doing now, and check in. Anytime you're at a crossroads, you can check in and say, hey, what does my inner self, what does my God force, what does my infinite intelligence have to say about the situation that I'm in? And usually when you quiet your mind long enough to tap in, what it has to say is always loving, always caring, non-judgmental, and reminds you who you are and where you come from. But it can never do that unless you give it the time and attention and the space that is required for that very subtle noise of inner self and inner wisdom to come through. So that was the inspiration of the book that I wrote that's coming out. It's coming out in October because I felt like there was too much noise, too much varied opinions, too much political opinions, too many people wanting to be the same person, wanting to be a Kardashian, wanting to look the same. And I felt compelled one night to write a book that would counteract all this external noise and teach techniques that would allow us to learn our inner voice from the simplest gut check to just checking your gut to see if something's right or wrong to full downloads and inspiration. And that's how the Intuition Bible was written. And I feel like it's guiding me just as much as it showed up on its own and had me write it. And now it's guiding me because sometimes I forget that I have an inner being, even though I wrote about it. And I do the exercises that are in my own book to start relearning how to speak to my inner self. Because no matter how acquainted you are with your inner voice, life happens, and when life happens, we tend to forget that we are connected to something greater. So I hope that analogy, that visualization, that image was helpful, because like I know people have so many analogies for God and what we all are, but I felt like that one resonates with me so much. Um, and thank you so much for having me. If you're interested in discovering stuff about the Intuition Bible, I'll put the link in the chat, and you can discover there's so much in there. It's really cool. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time, and I
Mm.
wish you an amazing day, week, month.
Thank you. Happy